In this next chapter, we will talk about the Texas executive. The learning objectives of Chapter 6 include trace the evolution of the Texas governor from a strong unified executive to a plural executive, assess what qualifies an individual to serve as governor, common career patterns that have led to the governorship, and select benefits of the office, explain the legislative, budgetary, appointive, judicial, and military powers of the Texas governor, evaluate the informal resources of the Texas governor for advancing public policy and political objectives, and differentiate the leadership styles of recent governors. Describe the duties and responsibilities of the other offices of the executive branch. We may not hit all these in the PowerPoint, but all of those can be covered very extensively in the book. Powers of governors have changed over the years from the beginning, from the Texas Republic up through the current governor. They enjoyed strong constitutional powers, a very strong centralized executive power. From the founding of the Republic up through 1866, which was the Reconstruction, the re-entry into the Union Constitution. The elected offices of comptroller and state treasurer were added in 1861. Now, prior to that, most every office in the executive branch was appointed by the governor. And that's what we mean by strong constitutional powers and strong central powers, that the governor is able to appoint the positions within the executive branch around him instead of having them be elected separately. That way he can put people in position who share his vision, who are beholden to him, actually. If they don't do what he says, he can have them removed from office. He can fire them. Then he was in 1866. He was granted a line item veto power, which is that's a big power to have. Instead of just having to accept an entire budget or veto an entire budget, he can pick and choose the things within the budget that he doesn't like, and he can veto them. And that's a power that all governors would want. So up to about 1866, he had those powers. Starting in 1869 with the Reconstruction Constitution, a plural executive was created, meaning members of the executive branch were elected separately. That takes a lot of power away from the governor. All those people in the executive branch, the comptroller, the treasurer, all the different, some of the different other offices, they're not beholden to the governor because they're elected separately. They're only beholden to the electorate of Texas, the voters of Texas. The governor cannot remove them if he doesn't like how they work. So members of the executive branch began to be elected separately, and they still are to this day pretty much elected separately. Expanded powers in the 20th century. The salary could be raised by the legislature in 1954, and the term of office extended to 4 years in 1972. Also, the governor in 1980, the governor of Texas in 1980, was given the removal power over persons appointed to boards and commissions. So kind of giving back some power to the governor as far as appointment power, but not near, today he does not have near the power, executive power that the governors enjoyed prior to 1866. The constitutional framework for the plural executive, Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution of 1876, that's the current Constitution, created the executive branch and how it works. In Texas, according to the Constitution, the governor appoints more than 200 policy-setting boards over state agencies and universities. So he doesn't appoint those people that run the state agencies or the universities, the administrators or anything like that. Just he appoints the boards that oversee them. But the boards do appoint the individuals responsible for day-to-day administration. But by appointing the boards, he does exercise some control over the agencies and the universities. The potential for conflict in the plural executive, I think it's very obvious. If the members of the plural executive are not on the same page, and potentially they could even be of different parties since they are elected separately, they can clash with the governor. Okay, they can operate independently. They can do whatever they want. They can say, well, the people voted for me in this agency to do, what I said I would do, even if it goes counter to what the governor expects or what the governor wants. So this idea of a of a plural executive can cause a lot of conflict, and it really can cause gridlock too in the executive and getting policies implemented. The potential also for conflict increases in a two-party state when you have kind of diametrically opposed points of view sometimes, and maybe, like I said, the governor is a one party, and some of the executives or some of the members of the other executive branch offices are of a different party. It makes it difficult to pursue coordinated policies also. When everybody's on the same page, things work more smoothly and go more quickly. If they're not on the same page, it usually doesn't. But one good thing for those that believe in checking the power of the executive and the governor, having all these different separately elected members of the executive branch does constrain the power of the governor. The governor cannot be as powerful as he could if, say, he appointed all of the other members of the executive branch. Now, what are the qualifications and backgrounds of Texas governors? The qualifications are fairly simple. You must be 30 years old, a U.S. citizen, and a resident of Texas for 5 years. So, don't have to be that old. You just have to be a Texas. You can move to Texas and become governor. Past governors, most have been Democrats until the last, 20 years or so, maybe 30 years. Most have been Democrats prior to that. Most all are wealthy. Most all are fairly well educated, usually with a college degree. Most are middle-aged, very few very young ones, and occasionally one that's quite a bit older, and white male Protestants. That's pretty much the demographic profile for past governors. Many governors had previous public service, meaning they served in the government in other ways, either in the legislature or maybe in state agencies or something like that. Or some have also, those that have run for governor and served in the U.S. Congress as well prior to being governor. Now, how is the governor impeached, or what happens if he is incapacitated, meaning he can't do his job or her job? Well, there's impeachment. If a governor breaks the law, or probably much like the definition of the U.S. Congress, commits a high crime or misdemeanor, they can be impeached or removed from office. The impeachment occurs when charges are brought by the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives acts as if it's a grand jury, and they look at the evidence, and if they feel like there is enough evidence that the governor has committed a crime, they vote for impeachment. And by majority vote, all it takes is 50% plus one. By majority vote, if they vote in favor of impeachment, the governor has been impeached. Now, that doesn't mean he has been convicted. It doesn't mean that he's being removed from office. It just means that he has been impeached. It's much like being indicted in our judicial system. It means you've been charged with a crime. Now, the jury that follows is in the Senate. That's where they actually determine guilt or innocence. And it's much like a regular trial, except all 31 senators are the jury. And it takes a 2/3 vote to convict. And if they get that 2/3 vote in the Senate, then the governor is removed from office. Now, other ways to remove the governor. Texas does not have a voter-initiated recall process like a lot of states do, where if you get enough signatures on a petition, you can call up another election in order to recall the sitting governor. Now, if something happens to the governor and he's impeached, he dies, he becomes incapacitated, he can't serve his job, the lieutenant governor, who is over the Senate, replaces the governor. The only governor to ever be impeached and removed from the as a Texas governor was James E. Paul Ferguson. Of course, he was he was popular among the people, but not among the legislature, and he was removed for challenging the University of Texas Board of Regents. He had some beef with the University of Texas, so he was removed only to and the legislature only to see his wife, Ma Ferguson, take his place. Well, get elected in the next election. Only in Texas do you have Paul and Maul Ferguson as governors of Texas. Some of the salary and perks of the governor's office. In 2015, the governor of Texas was paid a salary of $150,000 a year. That's just base salary, but that does not count all the perks of the job, such as he has the governor's mansion that he lives in, free. Of course, tax dollars pay for that. He has staff in the mansion who, maids, cooks, all those things, drivers. He has a state-owned plane that he can fly and state-owned cars that he can drive or be driven around in. He has a security detail, and then he has his own travel expenses. So when you add all that up together, it goes far beyond the $150,000 a year. Now, while the governor is the executive, and of course the legislative branch is different and separate, there are still some legislative powers that the governor has, meaning powers to influence the laws that are made in legislation. The first is the State of the State address. Much like the president gives the State of the Union address, the governor gives the State of the State address. And in these addresses, these speeches to both houses of the legislature, the governor can spell out his policy agenda. He can talk to the public and talk to Congress and talk to the world about what he expects of the legislature, what his vision is for policy in the state of Texas. And that's very important because it's picked up by the media and he can influence the public. Also, the governor can call special sessions of the legislature. As we mentioned in a previous chapter, the legislature meets for 140 days every other year. If the governor feels that there is a pressing issue that needs to be addressed that did not get addressed in the regular session of the legislature, he can call up Congress for a special session that can last up to 30 days. And the governor basically controls the agenda of that. He can call it up and he can tell them what to work on. And then veto power, as far as legislative power. He can veto legislation, either by line item veto or by vetoing the whole bill. It can be overridden, though, by a 2/3 vote in both houses of the legislature. So the veto by the governor is not absolute. It can be overridden. And he can veto bills up to 20 days after the close of the legislative session. So, and that makes it more difficult for the legislature to override it if if they've already left and went back home after the session is over. The governor also has budgetary powers. Not big budgetary powers, but he has some. He's got, compared to other governors, he's got weak budgetary authority over, how money is spent. The primary authority rests with the legislature and the legislative budget board. But once again, things like the State of the State address can influence, and special sessions can influence how money is spent. And that line item veto over appropriation bills or spending bills, it gives him some budgeting power. Also, a point of power. While he can't appoint many of the offices of the executive branch around him, there are boards and commissions, many of them where he selects members to serve on the boards. Of course, most of these are subject to Senate confirmation, so he can't just pick whoever he wants. They have to, pass through the Senate vetting process. Many of these boards members serve 6-year staggered terms to ensure you always have somebody on the board with experience. And some of the vacancies that he fills with a point of powers until new elections can be had. State, district, and appellate courts, judges, U.S. Senate seats, and all statewide offices except the lieutenant governor. So if something happens and a judge dies or resigns, or a U.S. senator does, or any other statewide office, he can appoint the temporary replacement. As far as judicial powers of the governor, appoints members of the Board of Pardons and Paroles. Pardoning basically means wiping clean a conviction or releasing somebody from a sentence, and paroles, granting them release from prison. Grants executive clemency, meaning just basically out of kindness, he can have a 30-day stay of execution. Usually they do the 30-day stay of execution to ensure that all avenues of evidence have been followed that might lead to an overturning of the conviction or some other mitigating factors. The governor can commute a death sentence to life in prison. Of course, that doesn't happen a lot. Most governors of Texas recently are fond of the death penalty. Also, he can offer full or conditional pardons for people who have been charged with a crime or have been convicted of crime. Responsible for ordering state officials to carry out extradition proceedings. So one of the judicial powers that the governor has is that if we have somebody here that is wanted by another state for a crime committed in that other state, the governor will order the extradition to be carried out. Military powers, he acts as commander-in-chief of the state's military forces, the State National Guard. He appoints the adjutant general, which is the kind of the head of the State National Guard, and mobilizes the National Guard to protect lives and property and to keep the peace. Things like disasters or fires or hurricanes or things like that. That's generally what the Guard is used for. The governor's staff, every governor can, organize the staff the way he or she wants. If you would like it highly centralized, that means you might have the governor, and then right below the governor, the chief of staff, who filters everybody that sees the governor. So the chief of staff will determine who gets to see the governor and when. That would be a highly centralized organization. Or many governors don't want that kind of gatekeeper to his advisors, and may just want to speak with all of his advisors whenever, kind of an open door policy, whenever they want. So how they're organized can impact how the information gets to the governor, the flow of information. Many are chosen for their media and public relations skills, the staff, so that if they're able to communicate what the governor wants the public to know in a clear, precise way, like press secretaries and things like that, or people with policy expertise as part of his staff. He wants people that are smart, that can, hopefully, that have expertise and knowledge of the different policy areas. Because the staff and his advisors will help develop the policy agenda and the legislative strategies. You want people usually with government experience as well, to know how how to navigate the policy process through the legislature, especially, and function as the governor's surrogates. Meaning, if there's something he doesn't want to do, he'll just send one of his advisors to go in his place and shake hands and give a speech or whatever. Now, those are all what we just talked about were really formal resources of the governor. Staff, mansions, things like that. Also, there's informal resources. The mass media is one. A good governor, a good politician, will use the mass media to promote their agenda and promote themselves as well. So to use the media to communicate policy objectives to the general public in order to mobilize public opinion. Because if you can, as the governor, if you can mobilize public opinion to support what you want, that puts pressure on the legislature to do what you want. Because now you've got the governor saying they want this, and you got the people saying they want the same thing. And even if the legislature doesn't want it as a whole, there's a lot of pressure on them to maybe do it anyway. Strategies in using the media, press conferences, just standing up there at a podium and answering questions and taking questions from the media. News leaks. When we hear about news leaks, we often think about it's something that the politicians don't want, like the governor doesn't like leaks. Well, sometimes he wants to know how the reaction will be if he says something publicly before he says it publicly, to find out the feedback. And so he will leak it himself on purpose, or have somebody leak it by his command in order to see. That's oftentimes also called a trial balloon, Because let's say he's thinking about, um, you know, implementing a new policy with regard to uh, school testing or something like that. Instead of just coming out with it and it, falling over and being very unpopular, he might have somebody leak out there that he's thinking about it and see the reaction. See if people are saying, "Oh, that's a pretty good idea. I hope he does it," or not. Use of public opinion polls. All politicians use those public opinion polls. Staging pseudo events to emphasize issues. Showing up at a factory and shaking hands with your hard hat on. To show that you're creating jobs as a governor. And of course, the use of radio and television to reach interviews and things like that, and commercials. But oftentimes, you'd rather the free radio and TV publicity by just doing interviews and things like that. The governor and interest groups, the governor will solicit endorsements and campaign contributions from these interest groups. Of course, that's a two-way street. If these groups give the governor's campaign money or support, they are going to expect something in return, and that's where the conflicts of interest can come in. And the governor also can pursue policy initiatives and legislation that benefit those groups. Here's just another graphic that shows the formal constitutional powers and the informal resources. Kind of a lot of the stuff we've already gone over. So if you wish, you can pause the video and kind of study on this. Recent governors of Texas. This might be useful to know. The last few governors that we've had. Of course, the current governor is Greg Abbott. Was elected in 2016. Prior to that, Rick Perry served from 2000 when he took over for George W. Bush all the way to 2015. Perry was the longest serving governor in Texas history. Then Bush, Ann Richards, the last woman and also the last Democrat to serve as governor. And then Bill Clements, who was elected twice in 1979 and 1987. So Clements, Richards, Bush, Perry, and Abbott are our last five governors. So it might be good to know. And finally, let's take a look at the other offices of the plural executive. I've been talking about this plural executive quite a bit. And these are just other offices in the executive branch that carry out the laws of the legislature. And they're all relatively important. They have important jobs to do. But once again, it's a plural executive, so most of these are elected separately. I believe the only one appointed of the main ones is by the governor is Secretary of State. But you have the Lieutenant Governor, which we've covered before, who's elected and presides over the Senate and is first in line to replace the governor. You have the Attorney General, the state's chief legal officer, gives legal advice to the executive branch. He's elected. The Comptroller of Public Accounts is elected. The state's tax administrator, accounting officer, revenue estimator, and treasurer all basically deals with all the money. Commissioner of the General Land Office is elected separately, manages state-owned lands, and also manages the Permanent University Fund and the Permanent School Fund. Those funds that help pay for all of our universities and colleges in the state of Texas. The Commissioner of Agriculture is elected and of course, obviously, oversees the agriculture of Texas and consumer protection laws. Then you have the Secretary of State, who is appointed by the governor. One of the few offices appointed by the governor, grants corporate charters and administers state election laws, ensures that elections are done properly, fairly, and efficiently. Other elected boards and commissions, Texas Railroad Commission. There are 3 members on the Texas Railroad Commission, and each one is elected statewide to staggered 6-year terms. Oversees railroad safety, and that's not such a big deal anymore. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, that was a big deal, railroad safety, because railroads was one of the primary transportations across the country. But not so much anymore. Now their main job of the Railroad Commission is to oversee the oil, natural gas, and mining industries, which are much more prevalent and much more valuable today than in the past. Also, other elected boards, the State Board of Education, 15 members, each one elected from a single member district across the state. And here's the thing, this is our State Board of Education, who translate legislative mandates into public policy, invest money in the permanent school fund, and most importantly, oversees textbook selection and curriculum standards. So basically deciding what our students learn and how they learn it. But here's the big problem, and one of the big problems I have with the State Board of Education. Because it's elected, there are no education requirements or education experience required. You could have a high school dropout that has never stepped foot in a college, or better yet, you could have an 8th grade dropout that never attended high school. And not that there's anything wrong with that, because there are many successful people that did not get higher education, but this person would be dictating to high schools what books would be used in their classrooms when the person has never been to high school. So it's a real issue that I personally have, and I've really not heard any good defense of not having either higher standards for being able to be elected to the State Board of Education, or maybe even finding ways to appoint members to the State Board of Education that are more qualified.